The people who try hardest to prove they've won are usually the ones afraid of losing. The crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections across the ballroom floor as laughter drifted through the air like expensive perfume. Waiters moved between guests carrying trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Everything about the evening was designed to impress. And standing at the center of it all was Ryan Bennett. He looked exactly like a man who believed life had rewarded him. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His smile never seemed to leave his face. One hand rested casually around the waist of his fiancée, Vanessa, while the other lifted a glass toward the crowd gathered around them. To second chances, Ryan announced, drawing another wave of applause. Sometimes life has a funny way of leading you to the person you were always meant to be with. More laughter followed. More smiles. More approving nods. Ryan loved every second of it. Across the ballroom, Claire Bennett stood quietly near a marble column. She wore a simple black dress that made no attempt to compete with the glittering gown surrounding her. A small silver bracelet rested against her wrist. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. Yet somehow, she seemed calmer than anyone else in the room. Ryan noticed her immediately. Of course he had. That was the entire reason she had received an invitation. Not because he wanted her there. Not because he cared about closure. He wanted an audience. And no audience mattered more than the woman he had left behind. Ryan raised his glass again. Some relationships teach you what love isn't, he said with a grin. Several guests chuckled. Claire could feel eyes turning toward her. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. A few seemed almost entertained. Ryan continued speaking as if he were sharing wisdom earned through hardship rather than rewriting history in front of 200 people. And then one day, he said, squeezing Vanessa's hand, you finally find the right person. The room erupted into applause once more. Claire simply smiled. Not a forced smile. Not an angry smile. Just a small, unreadable expression that never reached her eyes. She took a sip of sparkling water and looked around the ballroom. The towering windows overlooked the city skyline. Luxury cars lined the entrance outside. Everyone here seemed determined to celebrate Ryan's success story. No one talked about the years before the success. No one mentioned the tiny apartment where dreams felt larger than the square footage. No one remembered who worked extra shifts while Ryan built his career. Those details had quietly disappeared. Claire felt no desire to remind anyone. Ryan expected a reaction. Embarrassment. Jealousy. Regret. Something. Instead, she glanced briefly at the gold watch on her wrist. 7:42 p.m. A faint smile touched her lips again. Ryan noticed. His confidence flickered for half a second. It vanished quickly beneath another laugh. Across the room, guests gathered closer around him as he continued telling stories about his future, his engagement, and the wonderful life ahead. Claire listened without really listening. Outside, beyond the tall glass windows, headlights appeared at the end of the circular driveway. A sleek black vehicle rolled slowly toward the entrance. Claire lowered her gaze to her watch once more. Right on time. Inside the ballroom, Ryan believed the night belonged to him. He had no idea that before the evening was over, everything he thought he knew about winning was about to change. Most of the guests never questioned why Claire had been invited. They assumed Ryan was being generous. Mature. Gracious, even. That was the version of the story he preferred people to believe. From across the ballroom, Claire watched conversations unfold beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. She recognized some faces. Former colleagues. Old friends. People who once sat at her dining table on holidays and promised they would stay in touch. Most of them had not called her in years. Tonight, however, they offered polite smiles filled with curiosity. They looked at her the way people look at an old photograph. Familiar, but disconnected from the present. A woman in an emerald dress approached with a sympathetic expression. "You look great, Claire," she said. "Really? Great." Claire thanked her softly. The woman hesitated before adding, "I know tonight must be difficult." Claire almost smiled. Difficult. It was an interesting choice of words. Difficult had been watching unpaid bills pile up on a kitchen counter years ago while pretending everything would be fine. Difficult had been working 12-hour shifts and still finding energy to encourage Ryan when he wanted to quit. Difficult had been sitting alone in a lawyer's office after discovering that promises could expire much faster than wedding vows. This evening was not difficult. This evening was merely revealing. Across the room, Ryan continued moving from group to group, accepting congratulations like a politician on election night. Every laugh seemed slightly louder when Claire was within earshot. Every story about his future sounded carefully rehearsed. He wanted everyone to see how far he had come. More importantly, he wanted Claire to see it. Vanessa stood beside him like the final piece of a success story. Young, beautiful, confident. Together they looked exactly like the couple people expected to see on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Several guests glanced toward Claire before quickly looking away. Their expressions said everything. They believed they were witnessing the woman who lost. The woman who had been left behind. The woman who should feel regret every time she looked at her former husband. None of them knew that Claire no longer measured her life against Ryan's. She had stopped doing that a long time ago. Ryan eventually raised his glass again. "I am lucky," he told a small crowd. "Everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the wrong chapter has to end before the right one can begin." More laughter followed. Claire noticed a few people shift uncomfortably. Even they understood who the comment was directed at. Yet she remained perfectly calm. Her fingers rested lightly against her glass. Her shoulders never tensed. Her expression never changed. The reaction Ryan wanted refused to appear. Outside the ballroom windows, city lights stretched across the horizon like scattered diamonds. Inside, the music continued. The conversations continued. The assumptions continued. No one noticed that Claire seemed entirely unbothered by the performance unfolding around her. No one noticed the quiet certainty in her eyes. And no one noticed that the black vehicle outside had finally come to a complete stop beneath the entrance canopy. While the room focused on Ryan Bennett's version of success, the next chapter of the evening had already arrived. The ballroom doors opened quietly enough that most people did not notice at first. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations floated through the air. Yet something shifted near the entrance. A few heads turned. Then a few more. Claire noticed immediately, but her expression remained unchanged. Ryan was too busy enjoying another round of congratulations. A group of guests stood around him as he described plans for a luxury honeymoon and a future that sounded flawless from every angle. "Life is about moving forward," he said confidently. "You cannot stay attached to the past forever." Several people nodded. Vanessa smiled and leaned closer to him. Ryan looked completely at ease. Completely certain. Across the room, Claire glanced toward the entrance again. The black vehicle she had noticed moments earlier was no longer outside. Whoever had arrived was now inside the building. She lowered her eyes briefly to her glass before taking a slow sip. Ryan caught the movement and mistook her calmness for discomfort. That assumption made him feel even better. He excused himself from one conversation and casually made his way toward her. Guests noticed. The room did not become silent, but attention shifted. People sensed a moment approaching. Ryan stopped a few feet away and smiled. "I hope you are enjoying yourself tonight." His voice was pleasant enough to sound polite, yet there was something underneath it. Something carefully hidden. Claire met his eyes. It is a beautiful event. Ryan laughed softly. I am glad you think so. He looked around the ballroom as though admiring his own success. It took a lot of work to get here. Claire nodded. I know. The words landed differently than Ryan expected. For a fraction of a second, he seemed unsure how to respond. Then he recovered. Well, everything worked out for the best. Claire simply smiled again. The same calm smile. The same unreadable expression. It irritated him more than anger would have. Across the ballroom, one of Ryan's business associates approached. Ryan, congratulations, the man said before glancing toward Claire. Good to see everyone doing well. Ryan slipped his arm around Vanessa. Life has a way of rewarding the right decisions. The comment hung in the air. Claire heard it. So did several nearby guests. No one said anything. Ryan waited for a reaction. None came. Instead, Claire looked briefly toward the entrance once more. Her eyes softened. Ryan followed her gaze. A tall man had just stepped into the ballroom. His charcoal suit was simple. No flashy accessories. No dramatic entrance. He carried himself with quiet confidence that seemed completely natural. A hotel manager appeared beside him almost immediately, greeting him with unusual warmth and respect. Ryan barely noticed. To him, the newcomer looked like any other guest. Claire checked the time on her watch one final time. Right on schedule. For the first time all evening, a genuine smile appeared on her face. Ryan saw it and frowned slightly. He had spent the entire night trying to prove he was winning. Yet somehow, standing in the center of his own celebration, he suddenly felt as though he had missed something important. And he had no idea that the man walking across the ballroom was about to change everything. As the man crossed the ballroom, Claire felt a sense of calm settle over her that had nothing to do with the elegant surroundings. It came from memory. Not the painful kind that keeps people awake at night, but the kind that reminds them how far they have traveled. 3 years earlier, her life had fit inside a small apartment on the edge of the city. After the divorce, the silence had been overwhelming. No speeches. No celebrations. No friends gathering around to applaud her survival. Just quiet mornings and difficult decisions. She remembered standing in a grocery store holding a calculator, carefully adding prices before placing items into her cart. She remembered skipping small luxuries because every dollar mattered. She remembered walking through cold winter mornings to reach a second job because rideshare fares felt irresponsible. Back then, nobody called her inspiring. Nobody admired her resilience. Most people simply assumed she was rebuilding a life that had fallen apart. What they never saw were the small victories. The first month she paid every bill without stress. The first weekend she spent reading a book instead of worrying about the future. The first morning she woke up and realized Ryan Bennett was not the first thought in her mind. Those moments mattered more than anyone understood. Slowly, her life changed. Not through luck. Not through dramatic miracles. Through consistency. Through showing up every day when nobody was watching. She rented a modest storefront and opened a neighborhood coffee shop. The sign outside was simple. The furniture was comfortable rather than expensive. Every morning before sunrise, she unlocked the front door herself. The smell of fresh coffee beans filled the air. Regular customers began arriving. Construction workers. Nurses. Teachers. Retirees. People who appreciated kindness more than appearances. Over time, the shop became successful. Not because Claire chased status, but because she cared about people. She learned something important during those years. Peace felt different from happiness. Happiness came and went. Peace stayed. She no longer needed anyone else's approval to feel valuable. She no longer measured her worth against someone else's achievements. The woman standing in the ballroom tonight was not the same woman who had signed divorce papers years earlier. She was stronger, calmer, more certain of herself. Ryan never understood that transformation because he had stopped paying attention long before it happened. To him, success looked like luxury cars, expensive vacations, and public admiration. Claire had discovered another version entirely. One built on freedom. One built on self-respect. One built on knowing she could survive disappointment and still create a beautiful life afterward. The music in the ballroom continued as conversations drifted around her. Guests still viewed her through the lens of the past. They saw the woman Ryan left behind. They did not see the morning she earned her confidence one sunrise at a time. They did not see the life she built with her own hands. And they certainly did not know that the most important chapter of her story had begun long after Ryan walked away. Claire lifted her eyes toward the man approaching through the crowd. For the first time that evening, she felt grateful Ryan had invited her. Because before the night ended, everyone in this room would discover how wrong their assumptions had been. The man moving through the ballroom did not look like someone trying to impress anyone. That was the first thing Claire had noticed about Sebastian Hayes the day they met. It had been an ordinary Tuesday morning nearly a year earlier. Rain tapped softly against the windows of her coffee shop while customers hurried inside seeking warmth and caffeine before work. Sebastian had entered wearing a dark jacket and carrying a worn leather notebook. Nothing about him stood out. No entourage. No expensive display. No need to command attention. He ordered a black coffee, thanked her with a genuine smile, and sat near the window. The next morning he returned. Then the morning after that. Eventually he became part of the rhythm of the shop. Some customers arrived at 7 o'clock. Others at 8. Sebastian usually appeared at 7:32. Always polite. Always quiet. Claire learned that he preferred reading physical books instead of scrolling through a phone. She learned he listened more than he spoke. Most importantly, she learned that he treated everyone the same. Whether he was speaking to a delivery driver, a college student, or a business executive, his respect never changed. At first their conversations lasted only a few minutes. Weather. Books. Local events. Nothing personal. Nothing complicated. After everything Claire had experienced, she appreciated the simplicity. There were no promises. No performances. No attempts to impress. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, trust replaced caution. Sebastian never asked about her divorce directly. He never pushed for details. Yet somehow he seemed to understand more than most people without needing explanations. One afternoon, after a particularly busy morning, Claire admitted she was exhausted. Sebastian smiled and pointed toward the crowded tables. "Looks like you built something people love." The comment stayed with her longer than he probably realized. Ryan had always focused on growth, status, and numbers. Sebastian noticed effort. Character. Meaning. The difference mattered. Their friendship deepened naturally. There was no dramatic moment when everything changed. Just hundreds of small moments. Shared coffee. Quiet conversations. Comfortable silence. For the first time in years, Claire felt completely accepted for who she was rather than what she could provide. What she did not know then was that Sebastian owned companies operating in multiple states. She did not know his investments appeared in business magazines. She did not know financial networks discussed his decisions regularly. None of those details were visible inside a neighborhood coffee shop. And Sebastian seemed perfectly content keeping them that way. Back in the ballroom, he continued walking calmly through the crowd. Several hotel employees greeted him with unusual enthusiasm. One senior manager actually adjusted his jacket before approaching, eager to shake his hand. Ryan noticed the interaction but dismissed it. In his mind, influential people announced themselves. They arrived loudly. They attracted attention immediately. Sebastian did neither. Claire watched him approach and felt a quiet warmth settle in her chest. Not because of his wealth. Not because of his reputation. Because he had entered her life when nobody was applauding her survival. Across the room, Ryan still believed he understood exactly who had won and who had lost. The irony was almost painful. The most important person in the ballroom was now less than 20 feet away from him, and he had not recognized him at all. The closer Sebastian came, the more small details around the room began to shift. Most guests did not notice them consciously, but they felt them. The hotel manager who had greeted him at the entrance remained nearby, speaking with a level of attentiveness usually reserved for major investors or celebrities. A senior event coordinator crossed the ballroom just to welcome him personally. Even the general manager appeared briefly, offering a handshake and a warm smile before excusing himself. None of it was dramatic. That was what made it easy to miss. Ryan certainly missed it. He was too focused on maintaining the image he had spent the evening building. To him, status announced itself through obvious signals. Luxury watches displayed openly. Designer labels everyone recognized. Loud confidence. Public recognition. Sebastian carried none of those things. His watch remained partially hidden beneath his sleeve. His suit was elegant but understated. His expression remained relaxed, as though he had nothing to prove. Claire watched as he stopped to greet several employees by name. That always surprised people. He remembered names. Birthdays. Family stories. Small details others overlooked. It was one of the reasons people trusted him. Across the ballroom, Ryan noticed Sebastian speaking with a few executives he vaguely recognized from local business circles. For a moment, curiosity flickered across his face. Then he dismissed it. Successful people often attended events like this. It meant nothing. Vanessa leaned closer and whispered something that made him laugh. The moment passed. Meanwhile, several guests had begun quietly exchanging observations. One woman recognized Sebastian from a business magazine interview she had read months earlier but could not immediately place where. Another guest mentioned that he looked familiar from a financial conference in Chicago. A third recalled seeing his photograph connected to a major real estate acquisition. None of them were completely certain. The pieces existed, but nobody had assembled them yet. Sebastian finally reached Claire. The moment was remarkably simple. No grand entrance. No dramatic embrace. He smiled. Claire smiled back. "Sorry, I am a few minutes late," he said. "Traffic near the river was worse than expected." "You are right on time," Claire replied. The ease between them immediately stood out. There was no performance. No need to impress each other. Just genuine comfort. Ryan watched from across the room. Something about the interaction bothered him more than he expected. He could not explain why. The man appeared ordinary enough. Yet Claire seemed happier standing beside him than she had looked all evening. Not nervous. Not defensive. Happy. A few moments later, one of Ryan's business contacts walked by and froze briefly after noticing Sebastian. His eyes widened with recognition before he quickly composed himself and continued walking. Ryan caught the reaction. This time, he frowned. The feeling returned. The sense that something important was happening just beyond his understanding. Still, he ignored it. He had spent the entire evening believing he controlled the narrative. He did not realize that the story had already begun slipping beyond his control. And somewhere in the ballroom, the first domino was about to fall. The first domino fell when a distinguished older man entered the ballroom and immediately drew attention from nearly everyone in the local business community. Conversations slowed. Several executives straightened their posture. A few guests moved quickly to greet him. Ryan recognized him at once. It was Charles Whitmore, a respected investor whose approval carried enormous weight throughout the region. Ryan had spent months trying to secure a meeting with him. Tonight, he saw an opportunity. Excusing himself from a conversation, Ryan stepped forward with a confident smile. "Mr. Whitmore, it is an honor to finally meet you in person," he said, extending his hand. Charles shook it politely. "Ryan Bennett, correct?" Ryan brightened. "That is right. Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you. I appreciate that." For a brief moment, Ryan felt the evening returning to exactly where it belonged. Then Charles's attention shifted past him. His expression changed instantly. His face lit up with genuine warmth. "Sebastian." The single word seemed to travel farther than it should have. Nearby conversation stopped. Heads turned. Charles crossed the remaining distance without hesitation and firmly shook Sebastian's hand. "I had no idea you would be here tonight." Sebastian smiled. "It was a last-minute decision." "Well, this is a pleasant surprise." Charles laughed softly before adding, "I have been trying to get on your calendar for weeks." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. The effect was immediate. Several people nearby exchanged confused glances. Others stared openly. Ryan blinked. Surely he had misunderstood. Charles Whitmore did not wait for clarification. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to a few people gathering around, "if you ever want to understand strategic investing, spend an hour talking with Sebastian Hayes." More guests turned toward them. Recognition spread through the room in waves. Someone quietly whispered Sebastian's name. Another person suddenly remembered an article. A third pulled out a phone and searched online. Within seconds, expressions began changing. Curiosity became realization. Realization became shock. Ryan watched it happen without fully understanding why. Then one of his associates leaned close. "You seriously do not know who that is?" Ryan frowned. "Should I?" The man stared at him. "That is Sebastian Hayes." Ryan repeated the name. Slowly. Confused. Then the associate mentioned the investment group. The real estate portfolio. The acquisitions. The national business rankings. Each detail hit harder than the last. Ryan felt his confidence slipping. Across the ballroom, guests who had barely noticed Sebastian earlier were suddenly eager to introduce themselves. Yet Sebastian seemed completely unaffected by the attention. Instead of enjoying the spotlight, he remained beside Claire. Calm. Relaxed. Unchanged. That contrast made the truth even more powerful. Claire noticed Ryan standing motionless several yards away. Their eyes met briefly. She did not smirk. She did not celebrate. She did not appear interested in humiliating him. She simply looked peaceful. And somehow that hurt Ryan's pride far more than any insult could have. For the first time that evening, the room was no longer looking at him. The story had changed. The center of attention had shifted. And standing beneath the ballroom lights, Ryan finally realized he had spent the entire night underestimating the one person he thought he understood. Ryan tried to hide his discomfort, but the evening was no longer unfolding according to plan. Everywhere he looked, people were speaking about Sebastian. Some approached him directly. Others watched from a distance, hoping for an introduction. The attention felt surreal. Just 30 minutes earlier, most guests had barely noticed his presence. Now the atmosphere of the entire ballroom revolved around him. Ryan forced a smile and joined a conversation with several business associates near the bar. He needed to regain control of the evening. He needed to remind himself that one wealthy investor appearing at his engagement party did not change anything. Then he overheard something that made his stomach tighten. "The financing decision should be finalized next month," one executive said. "Everything depends on Hayes Capital now." Another nodded. Without that investment, a lot of expansion plans are going to stall. Ryan's attention sharpened instantly. Hayes Capital. He knew that name. His company had spent the last 6 months pursuing a major growth initiative. The final stage depended on outside funding. The numbers were strong, the projections promising, but competition for investment was fierce. More than once he had heard executives mention a powerful investment group reviewing opportunities across the region. Hayes Capital was at the top of that list. Ryan stepped closer. "Are you talking about Sebastian Hayes?" he asked. The men exchanged surprised looks. "Of course," one replied. "You know him, right?" Ryan hesitated. The pause lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. "Not personally," he admitted. The executive stared at him. "That is surprising. If your expansion proposal reaches the final review stage, there is a good chance his team will be involved." Another executive laughed lightly. "Not just involved. His opinion will probably decide everything." The words hit harder than Ryan expected. Suddenly, dozens of recent conversations rushed back into his mind. Board meetings. Investor updates. Financial forecasts. Every discussion about future growth seemed connected to a decision that ultimately traced back to the man now standing beside Claire. Across the ballroom, Sebastian was listening patiently while Charles Whitmore spoke about a new project. He did not look like someone carrying that level of influence. That was the problem. Ryan had spent years judging people by appearances. He had assumed success looked loud because that was how he presented his own. Sebastian looked nothing like the people Ryan expected to fear. Yet everyone important in the room seemed to respect him. Ryan glanced toward Claire again. For the first time all evening, he saw the situation clearly. The woman he had invited to impress and embarrass was standing beside one of the most influential people he had ever encountered. Not because she needed rescuing. Not because she was chasing status. Simply because that was the life she had built after he left. Claire laughed softly at something Sebastian said. The sound carried across the room. It was genuine. Unforced. Ryan could not remember the last time he had heard her laugh like that. Around him, the ballroom continued buzzing with excitement. Yet Ryan barely noticed. The realization settling over him had nothing to do with money anymore. It was the understanding that while he had spent years trying to prove he was moving forward, Claire had actually done it. And now the future he had been celebrating all night might depend on the very man standing at her side. The evening continued around Ryan, but it no longer felt like his celebration. Conversations that had once centered on his engagement now drifted toward investment strategies, market trends, and stories involving Sebastian Hayes. The shift was subtle yet impossible to ignore. Ryan stood among guests, smiling when expected, nodding when necessary, but his attention kept returning to Claire. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not taking advantage of the attention surrounding Sebastian. In fact, she seemed entirely comfortable remaining in the background. That realization bothered him most of all. Years earlier, he had convinced himself that leaving had been the right decision. He had told himself that success required difficult choices. He had built an entire narrative around that belief. Yet standing in the ballroom now, watching Claire laugh softly beside Sebastian, he began to wonder whether he had misunderstood success from the beginning. Eventually, Ryan approached them. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it felt much longer. "Claire," he said, his voice unusually careful. She turned toward him. "Ryan." There was no bitterness in her tone. No anger. Just calm acknowledgement. Ryan looked briefly at Sebastian before extending his hand. Sebastian shook it politely. "Nice to finally meet you," Ryan said. "Likewise," Sebastian replied. The exchange lasted only seconds. No power play. No hidden message. Yet Ryan felt strangely uncomfortable. Sebastian had nothing to prove. That confidence could not be manufactured. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Ryan looked at Claire. "You seem happy." The words escaped before he could stop them. Claire smiled gently. "I am." Such a simple answer. No speech. No attempt to make him regret anything. Just the truth. Ryan nodded slowly. He had expected satisfaction. Maybe even revenge. Instead, he found peace. And somehow peace felt far more powerful. Across the ballroom, guests continued celebrating. Music floated through the air. Crystal lights reflected across polished marble floors. The evening remained beautiful. Yet Ryan felt as though he were seeing everything for the first time. Claire had not spent years trying to prove him wrong. She had spent years building a life that no longer revolved around him. That was the difference. Sebastian glanced toward the entrance. "We should probably get going." Claire nodded. "You are right." They exchanged a few final goodbyes and began walking toward the exit. Not hurried. Not dramatic. Simply moving forward. Sebastian offered his arm. Claire accepted it naturally. Together they crossed the ballroom floor. Guests watched them pass. Some with admiration. Some with surprise. Others with quiet reflection. Ryan remained where he stood. Vanessa called his name from across the room, but for a moment he barely heard her. His eyes followed Claire until she reached the doors. Just before stepping outside, she glanced back one final time. Not at the ballroom. Not at the crowd. Simply at the life she had once lived. Then she smiled and walked forward. The doors closed behind them. The music continued. The celebration continued. Yet Ryan understood something at last. Claire had never needed to win him back. She had done something far more important. She had found herself. And in the end, that was the one victory nobody could take away.